This happened to me a few years ago. My therapist says it helps to tell people about traumatic events. Something like getting it off my chest. I don't go outside all that often anymore, and I don't talk to all that many people. So, I figure this is the next best thing. Take it as a cautionary tale. If you've ever worked retail, I'm sure you can relate to this experience at least at some level. I had a coworker who had absolutely no concept of personal space. At the time, I was a student and worked at a local grocery store. The way this company works is that each employee rotates jobs on a set schedule. So for a few hours in the shift you'll be at the register. The next you'll stock aisles. So on and so on. My apartment was in a city on the eastern coast of the United States. A mere 2-minute drive from my work. It was a nice setup. Classes in the morning and work in the afternoon. But if I am being entirely honest, my coworkers could get under my skin at times. They were relatively nice people, but they were the type who would avoid work like the plague and leave most of it to me while attempting to appear busy to our manager. Still, outside of the occasional misogynistic comments and the extra work, it wasn't so bad. But one of my coworkers in particular, Trevor, would not leave me alone. Like I mentioned earlier, we all had set jobs per shift. Yet, for hours at a time, he would come pester me, talking on and about whatever topic he chose that day. Usually it was about his girlfriend, about the renovations he was making to his new house, or what he did over the weekends. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind chatting. I don't mean to come across as an insensitive jerk who was too arrogant to make friends. His talking would last entire shifts without pause. It impeded my work. I would give him hints, social cues, and try to dismiss him as politely as I could. But it was like pebbles bouncing off of a brick wall. Nothing got through to him. More than once, a manager would pass us by and scold both of us for slacking because he wasn't at his designated job. I did explain this to the managers, and it provided a temporary solution. They talked to him privately and gave him a warning. From now on, he would need to stay at his position for the duration of his shift. I was happy that this freed me from his endless chatting while also making it seem like the issue was only his lack of work and not my annoyance and discomfort. Looking back, I almost wish I had just endured his chatting. This new enforced separation between us caused him to escalate. Now, he would wait for me to take my lunch so he could sit by me. Again, uncomfortably close to the point where I could smell his breath. This was some months after I first started working here, and he had ramped up his advances. A favorite topic of conversation for him was how he feels disconnected with his girlfriend, how she acted immature, and how he wished she was more mature. As per his own words, like me, he would make comparisons between me and her and talk about how great I was. He began to ask me to spend time together outside of work. Again, I do not want to come across as some snob who thought I was too good to make friends with him. I feel it's pretty obvious he had motives outside of friendship anyways. I really wasn't interested, and I gave a lame excuse every time he asked to hang out over a weekend. Usually something like I had to study for an exam or do homework. Eventually he picked up on the hints, but he took it the exact wrong way. Instead of dropping it and giving up, he adopted a tone of spiteful guilt-tripping which he would disguise as pointed jokes. For example, if I told him I was busy, he would say something like, "Still trying to avoid me? You sure seem to have a lot of homework. What class is it in?" He tried to catch me in white lies or make me feel guilty about declining. And sure, maybe it was dumb to lie at all. Maybe I should have just told him to go away. And I wanted this to end neatly for everyone so that my job wouldn't be even more uncomfortable than it already was. I guess I was hoping he would just give up. Again, it did become worse. He began to tell me about parts of his past. Deep, personal parts that should only be shared with people you are close to. For example, one day on break, completely unprompted, he began to talk to me about how he used to be an alcoholic, how he was suicidal, and how he nearly took his own life multiple times. I had no idea how to respond outside of giving cheap and frankly unenthusiastic sympathies. I was beyond uncomfortable, mostly because I felt like he was trying to scare me and guilt me into something I didn't want. As in, do what I want or maybe I'll hurt myself and it'll be your fault. I'm sorry to say it almost worked. For those of you who may think I neglected a person in need who was reaching out for help, understand that this man has been in a relationship with his girlfriend for 2 years and talks to me all the time about his family who he wins with. He has many people to support him who aren't just co-workers. It's important I give a bit of context about his living situation. As I mentioned, he bought a new house recently at the time. He was renovating it while still living with his parents until he was ready to either move into it or rent it out. While I'm at it, I'll explain mine to you as well. It'll be relevant in a little bit. My street turns off into a corridor of garages. It's how I and the other tenants who live here rent our apartments. The garage is separate from the living area and is divided by a small, outdoor concrete courtyard. I keep my grill here. The door to my house from this courtyard is a glass sliding door. At this point, I had enjoyed enough of what I considered to be Trevor's emotional manipulation. I sent an email to HR complaining about Trevor and the unprofessional things he had done. The next week, I didn't see Trevor at the start of his shifts. I did, however, see his car in the parking lot on my way in. When I clocked out, he was waiting for me by my car. I dreaded this conversation. I was sure HR had fired him. Did they mention my name to him? Was he going to do something extreme? But he simply explained to me that he had moved to another store location. He seemed bitter and angry. He asked for my number with venom in his tone. He almost demanded it. I didn't want to lie anymore. I was so ready for this all to be over and done with. I thought just one last step, and my life would be normal again. I told him no flat out. I told him I thought he was a fine person. I was glad to have chatted with him during our time working together, but I didn't want our relationship to carry on beyond work. His face fell flat, like hair leaving a punctured tire. I waited for a response. I was expecting insults, yelling, screaming, crying, maybe even a slap. But no, nothing like that. He told me, "I just want to show you our house." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew I was done with the conversation. So I wished him the best of luck, told him goodbye, and got in my car. As I was driving out of the parking lot, I could see him staring at the back of my car from my rearview mirror. I watched his unmoving form until it wasn't visible anymore. I breathed out a sigh that carried tension I didn't know I had. I felt like a weight had lifted off my back. No more Trevor. No more awkward conversations or trying to tiptoe on those brazen advances. No more trying to convince him of how his girlfriend was every bit as good as I was. I could just work and go home without worry or stress. I was honestly naive to think it would end here. I wish I had just taken it more seriously. Reported him to someone. I don't know who. In the next 2 weeks, life was great. I went to class, the gym, work, and home without any unexpected stress. On the 3rd week, I saw Trevor's car in the parking lot of my school. But there are plenty of the same types of cars on the road, right? It couldn't be him. And yet I recognized the dent on the front bumper. I looked around, dread setting in, but he was nowhere to be found. I cautiously went about my morning as usual. When I returned to the parking lot, his car was gone. Maybe he had enrolled and was taking classes. Who knows? It was arrogant to make it about me. At least so I told myself. A week later, I saw him at my gym. I was on the stair-stepper when I saw him across the room on a bench press facing my side. I am not one to insult newcomers, but he clearly had no idea what he was doing. He didn't approach, and I felt his eyes on me. I ended my workout early and went home. I became paranoid at this point. I would feel his eyes on me when I was alone. I would jump at the smallest sound. I stopped going out as often. I even switched gyms and took a week off from classes. I talked to my friends about it, and they told me I was being crazy. So he was taking classes at my college. It was that strange. He was in his late 20s. People go to community college at any age. And the gym is a public space. It's the nearest to both of us. Surely it was a coincidence. I shouldn't judge him for trying to improve himself. Their rationalizations didn't help me the night I caught his reflection in the sliding door, watching me as I struggled to unlock it after my shift. I spun on my heels, my vision tunneling in panic. But he wasn't there. I called the cops. They were reluctant at best, lazy and annoyed at worst. They assured me all was well and to call them if I saw anything again. I drove to a public parking lot, made sure there were plenty of cameras and people nearby, and slept in my car. Tried to. Rather, I couldn't stop looking out the windows and double-checking to make sure my doors were locked. When the sun rose, I called a friend of mine to check out my apartment with me. When we were sure it was empty, I finally felt just barely comfortable enough to be alone there. Luckily, before my friend left, I found it. When I saw it, My skin turned cold and clammy, and nausea rose in my throat. There, tucked under my pillow, was a photo. It was of Trevor and his girlfriend, but her head had been scratched out with something sharp. In its place was a picture of me, my face, eyes closed, fast asleep. I went straight to the police with it, but it was again pointless. According to them, the photo proved nothing. It could be easily faked. A photo wasn't enough to arrest someone. At this point, I was terrified most of the time. I constantly looked over my shoulder. I searched my house daily for I don't even know what. Cameras, more photos, anything. I had begun looking for other places to live. I was planning to end my lease early and leave town as soon as possible. Trevor was going to do something to me. I could feel it. I had been living at my mother's house during my search for another apartment. I let myself fall into a sense of security. I felt that nothing could happen to me in my own mom's house. And as the weeks went by without incident, I began to think maybe it was over. Maybe Trevor had moved on. Maybe he'd gotten bored with me. I underestimated his insanity. At my job, they offer employees free bottles of water. There are 2 fridges, one in the front of the store and one in the back, that you can grab water from at any time. I didn't even think about it. It was just habit. It was a Wednesday. The day was particularly slow and a handful of people had called out sick. I still wonder if Trevor had somehow planned that. Maybe I attribute too much power to him and my fear and hatred. I was closing that day, and I was a bit out of it already. The whole situation had been so stressful and school kept piling on. I just needed space to breathe. It made me vulnerable. I remember grabbing a bottle of water from the back about half an hour before I planned on leaving. I finished about half of it, went through the procedure of closing the store, and locked up. My head was spinning. The world air felt like molasses. Time slowed down. The last thing I remember seeing was a familiar red car with a dent on the bumper. I woke up in a wooden chair. The air smelled like drywall and concrete powder. My hands and legs were tied up to the chair. My screams were muffled by a dirty rag. To my disgust, I recognized the smell of sweat on them. It was one of Trevor's shirts. I looked around the room, trying to catch my bearings and maybe see if I could do anything about my situation. Honestly, I almost wish I hadn't. The walls were gray and unfinished, but I could hardly see it behind the massive photos covering its rough surface. Photos of me at the gym, at work, in class from the perspective of the window, in my apartment, and my bed. I had started to cry at this point, and I could taste my own stomach acid bubbling up from my throat. I had become lucid enough to make out singing. Trevor was singing somewhere in the house. It was Frank Sinatra's "I've Got You Under My Skin." I will never listen to that song again as long as I live. Tied up in that place, the lyrics of the love song sounded like death threats. Trevor came into the room after a while. He was smiling at me, not smug or threatening. He looked at me as if we had been dating for years. He kissed my forehead. I wanted to stop existing. He told me that he'd been planning this for a long time. He kept talking about how I had been confused, how he had been planning our lives together, preparing our home for when I was ready to be with him. He picked a handful of photos from the wall. They seemed as if they'd been touched more than the others. I don't know how to describe a photo as well used, but that's the best I can do, is say they looked worn out. He showed them to me, more edits or cutouts of him and I together. One of them had me in a wedding dress. Whether or not he could sense my terror or disgust, I don't know. But my lack of enthusiasm didn't seem to please him. His face soured. He began insulting me. I won't repeat what he said verbatim, but his point was that I was ungrateful. He said he would treat me right, it'd be the perfect partner, and I was too stupid to give him a chance. His anger grew to the point of rage, and I really believed he would end my life at that moment. But as soon as it had come, his rage subsided. His smile came back, and he said he forgave me. He told me I was still confused because of my friends and family. He said I would thank him one day for, according to him, saving me from them. He kept calling me pet names, which sent chills down my spine. In truth, his insane obsession probably helped to spare me. Had he been an outright killer, I wouldn't be typing this now. That being said, it's hard for me to honestly say that what happened was a preferable alternative to dying. He kept me down there for what felt like a long time. I learned later it was just over 2 weeks. I won't go into detail about all the things he did to me. I'm sure you already know. Regardless, I know I said I'm trying to get things off my chest in this post, but some things I can't bring myself to relive. I was easy to find. Luckily, I had made a big deal of Trevor to my work, to the police, to my mother and my friends. When I went missing, he was the first suspect. The day the police knocked on his door, I was more afraid than ever. If he thought his plans with me were at an end, this delusion of a future with me, I have no doubt he would have killed me and himself. In his mind, I'm sure it would be romantic. He opened the door to the two officers, who began to speak to him. I was weak, dehydrated and malnourished, but I put every ounce of energy I had into screaming through the filthy shirt he used to gag me. I heard their conversation pause. Then I heard footsteps. Quick, heavy steps. He was running towards my room. The door swung open violently. It was Trevor. I can't say for sure what he was doing. He wasn't armed, at least. He took a step towards me but was quickly stopped by an officer's taser. He collapsed, and the officer was on him in an instant, cuffing his hands behind his back. Trevor was crying. He was begging them to let him keep me. He kept asking me to tell them I loved him too. The other officer untied me and took the shirt out of my mouth. I collapsed into her and sobbed until I couldn't anymore. They took Trevor away in the back of a cruiser. I never saw him again, but that doesn't mean the story had a happy ending. I mean, I lived, which I am truly grateful for, but I can't see myself ever healing from this. I still find myself double-checking my room before I sleep. I still wake up at night in a cold sweat. I still feel panic whenever I see a car the same make and color as Trevor's. Obviously, too was mostly unjustified. This has marred my social and romantic life. It's been several years since then, and I can't stand to be touched by anyone. Sometimes, I can't help but feel like Trevor still won. Like he still has power over me. Even though I know he's locked away. I can only hope that I'll learn to cope with what happened one day. I graduated not long after and moved cities. My life has been going well, or at least as well as it can be. I took up therapy, like I mentioned at the beginning, but it's a slow process. I guess all I can do is my best. I appreciate you reading my story, if you did make it this far. And like I said, take it as a cautionary tale. There are some twisted people out there, and you never know what someone is capable of. Don't take half measures when it comes to your own safety. If you have a bad feeling about someone, please just play it safe. I only wish I could have told myself that, back when I had the chance. I started the day, same as usual. A new contract had just come through. Friday window cleanings for the new office high-rise downtown. Once a month. For 4 months. The suckers were paying twice my usual rate. But hey, I couldn't complain. We descended from the roof early in the morning and began to make our way down. This job would be easy today. We'd be doing floors 33 through 30, starting at the very top. It was about 330 when the bosun's chair reached the 30th floor. And a storm had hit our city a couple weeks back, so it was taking longer than usual to get each floor done. I turned to my partner, Reggie, and asked if he knew which floors we were supposed to cover next month. He leaned back against the rail and dug a weathered print of the job out of his pocket. Let's see. Today's the 12th, right? Today's floors are 33 through next month. He squinted, scanning for the details. Huh, same deal next month too. Just 33 through 30. Maybe these big farmy assholes keep all their important people up top. Don't care if the lower windows stay dusty. He chuckled, folding the paper up and replacing it in his overalls. Maybe. Don't look too fancy in there though. I picked up the squeegee and moved over to the next window. As I wetted down and cleared the dust off, I did something we're typically advised against, and I squinted to look inside. The room behind the glass was completely dark. Even against the afternoon sun. Typically we'd be able to see some semblance of light or activity inside. And I must have just been looking into an inactive floor. I had almost turned to look away. But then I saw him. Faintly, barely discernible in the dark hall. A figure sat in a chair, facing the window. He sat in complete darkness. His figure shrouded and his features hidden. Hey Reg, you see that? Reggie rolled his eyes. See what? We're not supposed to look in. Paulie, yeah, like, the guy's just, I don't know, looking at us. Tell me you don't see that shit. He peered inside and looked, just for a second. I don't see anything, man. Probably just a janitor taking a nap in the supply closet. Happens all the time. Did it every day at my old gig. Now hurry up. Once we finish this floor, we'll be done. We finished up by about 530 and left for home. I'd completely forgotten about the encounter for the next month. Its strangeness hardly relevant amidst the hectic working schedule we had to maintain. By the time our next cleaning for the building came around, it was out of my mind entirely. We started the day a little earlier, knowing it would take a few extra hours. Rag and I finished up our work on the 32nd floor and stopped to eat. We ascended to the roof where our packed lunches waited, and I enjoyed a leftover burger from when I'd grilled the night before. Adji looked up at me from behind his meager salad. You've got to watch that cholesterol, man. That stuff is no joke. He took his next sip of water with his heart pills. I shrugged. They're just jealous you can't have these no more. I chuckled through a juicy bite. We wrapped up and climbed back down into the rig and descended to the 31st floor to begin the second half of our day. As we made it down, I began to wipe down the glass when something inside caught my eye. The entirety of the 31st floor was dark, with every light turned off inside. In the darkness, however, I saw the same shadowy man sitting in the dim emptiness once more, just watching us. His chair was closer to the window this time around, and even though I still couldn't make out any details of his appearance, I could see his teeth, white and perfect, beaming at me through a sly smile. He was holding something that glinted in the sunlight in his hand, resting it on the arm of the chair. Couldn't make it out. Hey, Red. He's here again. Look. Red peered inside. I thought he was on floor 30. I don't see anything in there, man. You're starting to freak me out. I looked back inside, cupping my hands over the glass to get a better look at the figure. You don't see that shit? Dude is just staring at us. He's in an armchair like 10 feet behind the glass. He's smiling all creepy-like. I felt Reggie's hand grab the back of my harness and pull me away from the window. He looked at me sternly. Hey man, if there's anyone in there staring at you, it's because you're looking inside when you're supposed to be working. I want to get home before 6 today. Let's get back to work. Once more, we finished our work for the day. But the man inside didn't leave my mind so easily this time. When we returned a month later, Greg could tell I was nervous as we descended. Look, Paul, if it's about that dude, he's probably just the guy who hired us, making sure we're doing our job. Don't wig out about it, okay? I nodded. We finished our work on floor 33 and descended to 32. I could tell before the cart stopped moving that the floor was entirely dark. We stopped, and I jumped back as I saw the shadowed figure of a man sitting 5 feet from the glass. It was still too dark to see him in full, but that damned smile would have been visible from a mile away. His hand, hanging over the side of the chair, was loosely holding a gun. I tried to ignore it. I tried to put my mind aside from the man in the window, and after several minutes, began to hyperventilate. I sat down in the cart and nearly dropped my squeegee off the side down to the street below. Red nearly yelled at me. Dude, will you stand the hell up and stop rocking the cart? My heart can't take this shit. We're getting paid out the nose for this. Can we just finish and leave? I stood, shaky and panting as I peered back inside. The man was gone. I almost quit. I didn't know if I was hallucinating, or if someone in the building was messing with me. Red swore over the course of the next month that every time I'd freaked out, he never saw a soul inside. It took reminding myself that we just had one more cleaning before I could be done with the place, and that I'd be walking away with a hefty check to make me return. On the day of the last visit, I braced myself. It was overcast that day, and in the dim daylight I knew I'd have perfect visibility inside the windows. I prepared to see the same shadowy figure inside, his same smile as close to the glass as possible. I even prepared to see his gun, pointing out at me, but I knew he wouldn't hurt me. After all, it was just in my head, right? Low oxygen from the altitude, or just stress getting to me. Surely, at 710, I loaded myself into the bosun's chair from the roof and harnessed myself in. Reg looked over to me, putting his hand on my shoulder. Hey man, you cool? We'll try to wrap up early today. I can't have you freaking out again. I took a shaky breath. Yeah man, I'm good. I pulled the handle, and our cart began to slowly lower to the 33rd floor windows. He'd been one floor higher up each time, and I doubted the pattern would break today. I shut my eyes tight until the cart jolted to a stop. Then, slowly, I cracked them open. As I'd expected, the lights were off. I flinched but then exhaled. The room was empty. I stared almost in disbelief for a moment, and let out a laugh of relief. I approached the glass, peering in, and I felt my face stretch into a smile as the fear lifted off my shoulders. See? No one. I told you you'd be fine. Nan. As I stepped away from the glass, my eyes unfocused from the room inside, and I looked at my own reflection, cast in shadow from the clouds above and smiling ear to ear. The smile faded from my face, but the smile that my reflection wore did not. Large and toothy, its shadowed face wore a sickening grin, one that didn't quite reach its eyes. I looked down at its hand, where my squeegee should be, and saw only a gun, gripped loosely with a finger on the trigger. I watched as my reflection's smile grew impossibly wide, before it suddenly turned, a mouth stretched, pointing the gun towards Reggie's own reflection. Bang! Reggie fell back, his body toppling over the railing. He would have fallen over the side onto the pavement 33 stories below, but his harness held firm, dangling him over the edge. By the time I managed to pull him back over and swiftly get us up to the roof, he was already gone. The medic said he suffered a heart attack, and he was dead before he knew what had happened. I don't know what it was I saw in that building, but for obvious reasons, I'm not a window cleaner anymore. I don't want to sound paranoid or anything, but I think he's following me. It doesn't happen often, but sometimes I catch my reflection in passing. I swear it's smiling at me.